Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Tamisha, and I'm the Director of HR and Team Support at iVet360. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and often underused tools in the hiring process, behavioral interviewing. If you've ever made a hire that looked perfect on paper but didn't quite work out in practice, you're not alone. The resume can really only tell us so much. What really matters is how someone shows up on the job, how they solve problems, how they interact with clients, support their team, and handle pressure. That's where behavioral interviewing comes in. In this session today, it's designed to help you build a more consistent, competency-based approach to hiring in your veterinary practice. One that's not only more predictive of success, but also more fair and objective. There we go. Before we begin, let's give you a little background about our company and what we bring to the field. At iVet360, we work with veterinary practices across the nation, offering comprehensive services that include HR, marketing, analytics, and bookkeeping. Our mission is to educate and help hospitals implement innovative and sustainable operational best practices. Our purpose is to help more pets. Now that's a mouthful, but what it means for you is that we will do everything possible to assist you in making your practice as successful as it can be. A little bit about me. I've been in the vet industry for over 30 years, working in shelter medicine, private and corporate hospitals, and even on the vendor side in hospital sales. Most of my career, though, has been spent inside the walls of veterinary practices, supporting teams as a practice manager and multi-site leader. I loved the energy, the challenges, and the opportunities to help teams grow, and that passion eventually led me to my current role here at iVet360, where I get to share everything I've learned and continue to learn on a broader scale. Outside of work, animal-wise, I share my life with a spirited Portuguese water dog and a fun 6-year-old thoroughbred mare. At iVet360, I work closely with practice owners, managers, and team leads to strengthen operations, reinforce culture, and navigate everything from everyday workflows to those surprise HR challenges. I'm a big believer in having the right systems in place, but also in creating a space for connection, collaboration, and a little bit of fun along the way. In our department, we often say that we've seen it all, but the truth is this field always has a way of keeping us on our toes. That's what makes it so rewarding. There's always something new to learn, and I'm thankful to be learning and growing alongside all of you today. You'll see Rosie helping host and moderate today's webinar. She's one of my talented teammates in the HR and team support department. And if you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat and Rosie can help answer them for you. We will also save some time at the end of our webinar today to answer any questions. So here's a roadmap for today, and I have to say, I'm really excited to share this with you. I've been using behavioral interviews for quite a while now, and I genuinely enjoy the process. It's given me a much clearer picture of candidates, especially their competencies and behaviors that would have been easy to miss with more traditional old school interviews. What I love most is that this approach helps reveal how someone actually works, not just what they say on paper. You start to see how they handle real challenges, how they communicate, and how they show up under pressure. Today, we're going to walk through how to bring that same insight and structure into your own hiring process. What we'll cover, why behavioral interviews matter, and how they improve hiring outcomes in your veterinary practice, what to look for in candidates by identifying core competencies that truly drive success, how to write better questions using the STAR method so you get honest, specific stories instead of surface level answers, how to conduct interviews in a way that feels structured but still human and conversational, how to fairly evaluate and decide who's the best fit for your team, and finally, we'll wrap up with some resources and tools that you can take back to your hospital and use right away. Let's start with the basics. So this may feel a little obvious, but it's important to lay the groundwork before we build up. So let's ask, Why do we interview in the first place? Interviews are a critical step in the hiring process. They also play a big role in succession planning. But beyond just checking a box, interviews offer some real value. They're often your first chance to connect directly with a candidate. They allow managers and team members to interact with the candidate and get a sense of their skills, experience, knowledge, and behaviors, insights that you can't just get from a resume or a reference. They help you determine whether a candidate truly meets the requirements of the role, not just on paper, but in real life. And just as importantly, they help you assess whether that person is likely to be a good fit for your hospital's culture and team dynamic. The ultimate goal of the interview process is to identify someone who not only brings the right skills and experience to the table, but also aligns with your practice's values, mission, and team energy. To do that successfully, hiring managers need to feel confident and prepared to lead an effective interview. So let's talk about how we get there. When you're interviewing candidates, time is limited and there's a lot to cover. That's why having a clear, consistent approach is so important. Using effective interview techniques allow you to make the most of each conversation and ultimately help you make the best hiring decision. There are 7 essential steps to keep in mind during your interview process. And these steps help ensure that you're gathering the right information, creating a positive candidate experience, and setting your team up for hiring success. These steps include having a dedicated space to have the interview, preparing a list of questions, reviewing the candidate's resume and cover letter, making sure that your interview is conversational, keeping the candidate aware of the process and next steps. You want to involve your team by having an observational interview, and of course, following up after the interview. Let's talk about location because it actually matters more than you might think. Where you choose to hold the interview can directly impact its effectiveness. We all know veterinary hospitals are busy, often noisy environments, and an hour-long interview can easily be derailed by all the interruptions. Whenever possible, aim for a quiet, private space that allows for an uninterrupted one-on-one conversation. This helps both you and the candidate stay focused and makes the candidate feel more comfortable opening up, knowing that they aren't being overheard. If you have an office or break room that offers privacy, perfect, use it. If not, don't be afraid to step outside the hospital. A nearby coffee shop or quiet cafe can be a great alternative, especially when privacy inside the practice is hard to come by. Try to avoid conducting interviews in exam rooms or other clinical spaces where the noise level is higher and foot traffic is more constant. And before the interview begins, double check that everything is in place. Seating, materials, I like to have a bottle of water on hand for the candidate, and that your team knows that an interview is happening. This simple step ensures a smoother, more professional experience and helps leave the candidate with a positive impression of your practice. Let's talk about preparation because the quality of your questions directly impacts the quality of your interview. Start by planning a list of questions based on the role's requirements. The number of questions you prepare should match the type of interview that you're conducting. So for an initial phone screen, which is typically 20 to 30 minutes, aim for 5 to 10 questions. For a longer in-person or video interview, prepare 10 to 15 thoughtful, open-ended questions, but expect to ask enough questions to cover an hour-long conversation. Make sure to include behavioral interview questions. These questions ask candidates to describe how they've handled specific situations in the past. They give you insight into a candidate's problem solving, critical thinking, and communication skills. We're going to go deeper into this technique later in the webinar. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but consistency is key. Asking the same core questions across candidates helps you make fair comparisons and reduces the risk of bias or claims of unfair hiring practices. It also makes your decision-making process much easier. Don't forget, one of the most effective interview techniques happens before the interview even starts. I know this seems obvious, but make sure to take a few minutes before the interview to review the candidate's resume and cover letter so that you can refresh your memory on their background. If you're conducting multiple interviews in a short period of time, it's helpful in keeping everyone and every detail straight. As you review their resume, look for areas that you'd like the candidate to expand on. Encourage them to elaborate on resume bullets, clarify any employment gaps, or explain job changes. This keeps the conversation dynamic while helping you better understand how their skills and experience align with the role. Keep in mind that interviews go both ways. So, just as you're looking for the right candidate, they're going to be evaluating whether your hospital is the right fit for them. That's why it's so important to create a positive first impression by making the interview feel welcoming and conversational. You can start by using the first 5 to 10 minutes to build rapport. Ask how their day is going, whether they've had any trouble finding the location, and if they'd like a glass of water. These small, simple gestures go a long way in helping candidates feel more at ease. If you have something in common, like a shared alma mater or mutual connection or some similar interests, mention it. It's a great way to break the ice. I also recommend letting your candidates know at the start of the interview what type of questions they can expect and how you'd like them to respond. So you could say something like, some of my questions today will be behavioral, which just means that I'm going to ask you to share some real examples from your past work experience. And I'd love for you to tell the story as if you were talking to a friend. So walk me through what happened, what you did, and how it turned out. Saying something like this can help the candidate open up and provide richer answers and gives you a better sense of how they actually handled situations on the floor. Throughout the interview, help the candidate get a sense of what it's like to work in your practice. So you can do this by sharing what your current team enjoys about working there, whether it's the supportive environment, team culture, or learning opportunities. This kind of insight can make a big difference if you extend an offer later. And then remember, interviews should be a two-way conversation. So leave time at the end for candidates to ask questions. Their questions are going to reveal how engaged they are and what matters most to them in the workplace. And then finally, be clear about what happens next. Let them know how your hiring process works, especially if there's multiple rounds or other people involved. And then tell them how you're going to follow up, whether that's by phone or email, how long your decision might take, and when you're aiming to fill the role. In addition to standard interviews, many veterinary practices find value in observational interviews as part of their hiring process. This approach gives you the opportunity to assess a candidate's communication style, also their situational awareness and their cultural fit by allowing them to shadow your team during a typical shift without directly participating in patient care. During an observational interview, the candidate observes how your hospital flows, how the team interacts, and they get a real feel for how the clinic operates while also having the opportunity to ask questions and take in the environment. At the same time, your team gets to observe the candidate's professionalism, demeanor, and level of engagement. This method is especially helpful when a candidate is not yet insured to handle animals, when you might want to avoid wage or liability issues, or when you're still early in the early stages of evaluating their skills and overall fit for the team. A well-executed observational interview can sometimes eliminate the need for a working interview altogether. If the team has a chance to see how the candidate communicates, ask technical questions, and evaluate their approach, you may gather all the insight that you need without even having to have them physically perform tasks. That said, to get the most out of the experience, it's essential to prepare your team ahead of time. So before the observational interview takes place, Share the candidate's resume with your team. Let them know who they will be observing and what role they're being considered for. Ask the team members that they'll be interacting with, that will be interacting with the candidate, to prepare one or two questions in advance. This is going to keep the conversation flowing and make the experience more meaningful for both sides. You can also include some technical questions to help gauge the candidate's skill level. For example, you might ask, can you walk me through how you set up a dental? Or what's your preferred technique for placing a catheter? Or even, how do you explain the importance of heartworm prevention to a client? These types of questions can reveal confidence, knowledge, and communication skills without putting the candidate in a hands-on scenario. Now let's talk about working interviews. A working interview allows the candidate to perform actual job duties, such as restraining pets, placing catheters, or answering phones, as if they were already part of the team. This format is typically used when the candidate is further along in the hiring process and you're ready to assess their clinical or technical competence in real time. One important legal note to keep in mind: if you conduct a working interview, the candidate must be paid at least minimum wage, and you need to ensure that you have the proper liability coverage in place. So, this includes confirming that your insurance covers temporary workers in the event of an injury. Working interviews tend to be most appropriate for technicians and associate veterinarians. However, they do come with more risk, so it's important to be fully prepared on the back end before inviting someone in for this type of hands-on assessment. The best approach is often to begin with an observational interview to evaluate culture fit and interest, and then move to a working interview if needed, only after you've outlined pay, expectations, and responsibilities. And then after either type of interview, be sure to gather feedback from your team, ideally using a simple scorecard or checklist to ensure consistency. By combining both techniques strategically and preparing your team well in advance, you'll gain a more complete picture of the candidate while minimizing risk to your practice and improving the likelihood of making a confident, informed hiring decision. Ending the interview process with strong communication is just as important as how you began it. Whether or not you decide to move forward with a candidate, following up is a sign of respect for their time, energy, and interest in your hospital. It also leaves a lasting impression, one that can influence your reputation as an employer, especially in the tight-knit veterinary community. If you're not moving forward with a candidate, always notify them. Don't leave them wondering. Send a polite, professional email thanking them for their time and participation. And if possible, share a brief, um, constructive feedback about what they did well, and why you chose to go in another direction. And then consider keeping standout candidates on file for future roles or openings. If you are moving forward, call successful candidates to share the good news. This adds a personal touch and allows you to gauge their enthusiasm. Let them know clearly whether you're extending an offer or just moving into the next round. And then be prepared to answer questions about next steps, timeline, compensation, or onboarding. Timely and thoughtful communication, especially in a competitive hiring market, can differentiate your practice as one that values professionalism and empathy. It increases the likelihood that even declined candidates will speak highly of their experience with your team. Earlier, we talked about the importance of preparing your interview questions in advance. And one of the best types of questions to include are behavioral interview questions. So, how do behavioral interviews work? Behavioral interviewing is based on a key hiring principle. The best predictor of future performance is past performance, especially in similar situations. This technique focuses on specific examples from a candidate's previous experience to understand how they're likely to perform in your hospital. Unlike hypothetical questions like, what would you do if a client was upset, behavioral questions ask candidates to share real stories. For example, you might ask, tell me about a time that you had to calm down a frustrated client. What did you do and what was the outcome? This approach gives you insight into how a candidate thinks and responds under pressure, patterns of behavior that they've shown in past roles, and their real-world problem-solving and interpersonal skills. Behavioral questions tend to be pointed, specific, and probing. They're designed to go deep, getting into the heart of how someone handled tough or meaningful moments in the workplace. To make behavioral interview questions truly effective, they should be structured. So that means all candidates receive the same questions in the same order, and their answers are scored using the same rubric or evaluation system. This consistency is key. It's going to allow you to make objective comparisons between candidates based on job relevant criteria. It does take more planning and preparation up front, but the result is a more thoughtful and consistent hiring process. Now that we've talked about how behavioral interviews work, let's talk about why they work and why I'm such a fan of them. First, behavioral interviews give you solid, verifiable information about a candidate's real life experience. You're not just hearing what they say they would do, you're hearing what they've actually done. That's a much stronger indicator of future success on your team. Remember, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. Second, as I mentioned earlier, behavioral interviews fall under the umbrella of structured interviews, which are incredibly powerful. The structure has two big benefits. One, it ensures fairness and consistency. Every candidate is assessed using the same questions and criteria. And two, it reduces bias and guesswork. That means you're less likely to make hiring decisions based on instinct or gut feeling and more likely to rely on data-driven insight. This structure not only improves your ability to compare candidates fairly, but it also protects your practice legally. A well-designed, structured interview process provides a stronger defense against claims of discrimination. And there's a bonus here because behavioral interview questions are directly tied to the actual responsibilities of the role, they tend to feel more relevant and fair to the candidate as well. Most candidates appreciate being asked about their real experience rather than being put on the spot with abstract or unrelated hypotheticals. It gives them a clearer sense of what the job actually involves. So, in short, behavioral interviews are consistent, job focused, legally sound, and incredibly effective. They provide you with meaningful, actionable insight into how a candidate is likely to perform, and that's exactly what you need to make the right hiring decision. Before you can evaluate candidates effectively, you need a clear picture of what success looks like in the role. One of the first and most important steps in any hiring process is defining exactly what you're looking for in a new hire. That's not always easy, but this is where behavioral interviewing becomes invaluable. It's specifically designed to make your evaluation process more focused, objective, and aligned with the qualities that drive success in your hospital. So when you're getting ready to write behavioral interview questions, a great place to start is by asking yourself a few key things. First, what knowledge, skills, or attributes are absolutely essential for someone to succeed in this role? Think about things like venipuncture skills or whether knowledge of Avamark or Cornerstone is necessary. Even something like attention to detail when preparing medications can be critical. Next, ask what behaviors actually reflect your hospital's values and expectations. For example, do you need someone who stays calm under pressure, someone who's quick to help out a teammate, or who shows real compassion to clients who are clearly stressed? And finally, what competencies do we really want to prioritize when we're comparing candidates? This could be things like strong communication, the ability to adapt quickly during an emergency, or being able to multitask effectively in a fast-paced environment while staying accountable. Thinking through these three areas ahead of time will help you craft questions that actually give you useful, job-relevant answers. These questions help lay the foundation for a competency-based approach, which is a common framework used in behavioral interviewing. So, what do I mean when I say a competency-based approach? It's really just a structured way to identify and evaluate the behaviors that actually drive performance in your practice. Competencies are those specific, observable actions that we can clearly see, measure, and assess. In a veterinary setting, some common competencies might be teamwork. Are they communicating well with techs, doctors, CSRs? Are they cooperating in a way that keeps the day moving smoothly? Client service. Do they stay professional and empathetic even when a client is emotional or upset? Accountability. How do they respond when priorities shift or when there's a medical emergency? Reliability. Are they following protocols consistently? Are they showing up on time and taking ownership of their tasks? When we build our interview questions around these kinds of competencies, we're focusing on what really matters, not just what looks good on a resume. By focusing your hiring process around these and other key competencies, you're not just hiring someone who says the right things, you're identifying someone who has demonstrated the right behaviors in past roles, in turn, increasing your chances of long-term success. Let's talk about why using a competency-based approach to behavioral interviewing is such a powerful tool, especially in veterinary hospitals. First, it gives us direction. When we clearly define the key competencies for a role, we're spelling out in behavioral terms what success actually looks like. These are aligned with your hospital's culture, your standards, and your goals. It's no longer vague or up for interpretation. Everyone understands what's expected and what's valued. Second, competencies are measurable. This is huge. It means you can consistently assess whether candidates and even current employees are demonstrating the kinds of behaviors that lead to success. You're not just going with a gut feeling or hoping someone will figure it out. You've got a framework that ties directly to performance and results. Third, competencies can be developed. They're not personality traits or fixed characteristics. These are learned behaviors and skills, and that's encouraging because it means you can coach them, support them, and build them over time. That's a win not just for hiring, but for growth and retention. Competencies also help differentiate your practice. When you're really clear about the behaviors that matter most, whether it's empathy, initiative, teamwork, or adaptability, you start to create a unique culture that people can feel. And that makes your hospital stand out in the hiring market during onboarding and even in client service delivery. And finally, this approach helps align your management practices from hiring and onboarding to performance reviews, promotions, and ongoing development. These competencies become the thread that ties everything together. You create a more consistent, intentional experience for your team, and that leads to better outcomes across the board. So at the end of the day, when you hire based on competencies, you're not just asking, can they do the job? You're also answering, will they thrive here? Will they contribute meaningfully to our goals? That's where you get better performance, stronger culture, and people who actually stick around. All right, now let's dive into how to actually craft behavioral interview questions. Questions that are going to help you uncover whether a candidate truly has the competencies you're looking for. Remember, the goal here is to get real examples from a candidate's past. So stories that clearly show how they've demonstrated key skills and behaviors that matter in the role that you're hiring for. To be effective, your questions should do two main things. First, they need to be clear and concise, not long-winded or overly complex setups. And second, they should be open-ended. We want candidates to talk. We want them to walk us through situations and not just give a yes or no answer. A great tool to help both you and the candidate is the STAR model. If you haven't used it before, STAR stands for situation, so what is happening or what was happening, task, what needed to be done, action, what did they do, and result, what happened as a result of their actions. Let's take a simple example. Let's say that you're hiring a technician and one of the competencies you look for in a tech is their ability to prioritize tasks. You can ask a question like, tell me about a time when you had to handle multiple patients needing your attention at once. You could then guide the candidate like this. What was going on at the time? So that's your situation. What were you responsible for? That's the task. What actions did you take to manage it all? And then what was the end result? This approach does two things. It gives structure to the candidate's answer so they don't ramble or get off track, and it helps you assess whether what they did actually aligns with the behaviors and outcomes you're looking for. Here's a quick tip. Before you finalize your list of interview questions, test them out on your current team members. Ask them the same questions you plan to use in your interviews. Not only will this help you confirm that the questions make sense, but it might also uncover a few follow-up or probing questions you wouldn't have thought to ask otherwise. All right, so you've put together your behavioral interview questions or selected ones that are aligned with your role and competencies. Now, the next step is to create a rating scale to evaluate responses. A rating scale is what gives your interview process structure and consistency. It's the foundation that helps you objectively compare candidates, not based on gut feelings, but based on a clearly defined framework. Here's the key. Your rating scale has to be well defined. Everyone on the interview panel should understand exactly what each rating means and how to apply it. That's what ensures consistency across interviewers. Now, there are a couple of different approaches when it comes to rating scales, so let's break them down. You can start with a simple scale, something like satisfactory or unacceptable, just a binary yes, no, pass, fail. The pros here are that this kind of scale is really easy to use. It cuts down on deliberation and helps avoid decision fatigue, especially if you're interviewing a lot of candidates in a short period of time. But the downside is that it tends to flatten your results. So you may find yourself saying satisfactory for everyone or unacceptable with no real ability to differentiate between people. And in behavioral interviews where nuance matters, that's not going to be ideal. So while this scale is fast, it doesn't give you much depth. On the flip side, you can go with a more complex scale, like a 1 to 5 rating, what we often call a Likert scale. The advantages here are that these give you more range and nuance. You can more easily compare candidates and recognize when someone went above and beyond versus someone who just met the minimum. It also allows you to factor in other insights like body language, tone, and alignment with your hospital values. The downside, it does require your team to spend more time evaluating and discussing what a 3 means versus a 4, but that's a trade-off that I think is worth it. Whether you use a simple scale or a more complex one, the most important thing isn't the number of points on the scale, it's how well you define what each rating actually means. So here I have a generic example of a well-defined scale for behavioral interviewing. We've got a 5-point scale with 5 being far exceeds. This is your rock star answer. The candidate hits every point, provides clear and relevant examples, and shows that they can do the job consistently and independently. At 4, we have exceeds requirements, so they're still strong. They demonstrate the competency in most situations. They may need minimal guidance, and they share several solid examples. Then we've got your midpoint, meets requirements. This is your baseline. They perform well in familiar situations. They may need supervision for newer tasks, and they give at least one decent example. For below requirements, they're inconsistent. Even with guidance, they struggle to show competence, and you might hear vague or incomplete answers. And then lastly, we have one, meaning there's a significant gap. They can't demonstrate the competency at all, regardless of guidance. They don't give any real examples to support their claims. The more clearly you define each of those levels, the easier it is for your interviewers to evaluate candidates accurately, and for your final hiring decision to be based on something measurable and job relevant. So in summary, rating scales help you stay consistent. The more variance we have in the scale, the better we can compare candidates. All right, so now that you've developed your behavioral interviews and landed on a solid rating, the next step is prepping for the interview itself. And I don't just mean printing out a copy of the questions. This is about making sure that everyone involved is really set up to have a productive and fair conversation with each candidate. So first, let's talk about who's actually conducting the interview. In most veterinary practices, it's typically the practice manager or practice owner who takes the lead. But depending on the position, you might bring in a lead technician, a lead CSR, or even a lead doctor to join the process. And that's a great move as long as it's intentional. While scheduling convenience might be tempting, like who's available at 2 p.m., that shouldn't be the main reason someone's on the interview panel. Instead, you want to be strategic. You want people in the room who represent a leadership role that's actually tied to the position that you're hiring for. You want someone who knows the role well and can speak to both the behavioral and technical aspects, who can communicate in a way that's confident but welcoming. Remember, this is a conversation, not an interrogation. And someone that can evaluate not just the individual's skill set, but also how they'd fit into the culture of your team. A pro tip here, try to use the same interviewer or interview team for every candidate applying for the same role. It's one of the easiest ways to ensure consistency in how candidates are evaluated. Now, once you know who's going to be interviewing, take a few minutes to pre-interview prep, especially if you're bringing in someone like a lead tech or a lead CSR who hasn't been trained in behavioral interviewing before. Even a short prep meeting before the interview can go a long way. What you're going to want to cover. So review the interview questions and make sure that everyone's on the same page. Go over the rating scale. What does a 4 look like versus a 2? And then talk about how to interpret the candidate's responses and what red or green flags to look for. And then get aligned on how the interview should flow. So who's asking what, who's taking notes, who's starting off the interview. If you skip this step, you risk going into the interview with different expectations, which make scoring and comparing candidates a lot more difficult later. Now let's talk about what to actually do while you're asking behavioral interview questions. When you're in the moment, your job as the interviewer is to stay present and listen actively. Take clear, objective notes, but don't just scribble everything down without realizing or, really hearing what the candidate is saying. You want to capture key points without breaking the flow of the conversation. Also, try not to interrupt. Let the candidate talk. Silence is okay. It gives them time to think, and you might get deeper insights when you just let that pause hang there for a second. And then remember, these aren't casual, tell me about yourself questions. Behavioral questions are designed to get specific examples of how a candidate handled real situations in the past, not just what they did, but how they did it. So as you're guiding the conversation, encourage candidates to focus on their own actions, not the team's. So this is about what they did, not what we did. Ask them to include how, so how they made decisions, how they approached the situation, what steps they took, and then ask them to share both the challenges they faced and how they worked through them. One thing that really helps here is reminding them to use I statements. For example, when X happened, I did Y to accomplish Z, not we. I hear that a lot. We did this. We want to understand their role, their thought process, and their impact. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to collect surface level answers. It's to gather concrete evidence of the behaviors and competencies that matter in your hospital. So you're looking for clear, real world stories and not vague generalizations. Even though behavioral interviews are structured, and they absolutely should be, you still want to leave room for some flexibility in the conversation. That's where probing questions come in. Probing questions are one of the most effective tools you have as an interviewer. They help you dig deeper into a candidate's response, especially when something is unclear, vague, or just seems like it needs a little bit more detail. These follow ups are guided by what you're hearing, and just as importantly, what you're seeing in the candidate's nonverbal cues. Here are a few examples of probing questions that you might use in the moment. You could say, I'm not quite sure I understood that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? You mentioned X. What stood out to you about that experience? Could you give me a specific example? Can you walk me through what you did step by step? Now, these questions aren't something that you're going to script in advance. They come up organically based on how the candidate is responding to your original behavioral question. That means your ability to ask strong probing questions really depends on active listening. You have to be present, curious, and tuned in to what they're saying and how it's being said. It's also important that your probing questions stay open ended. You're not trying to lead the candidate toward a right answer. Your job is to invite more depth, not put words in their mouth. So, when should you lean into probing? Again, when the candidate gives a vague or surface level answer, when their tone or body language shifts, maybe they seem nervous or unsure, or when they're pausing a lot or struggling to explain something clearly. A well timed follow up can turn a generic answer into a really thoughtful one, and it shows the candidate that you're engaged and genuinely interested in what they're sharing. Note taking is one of the most important things you can do during an interview. It helps you remember what was said and gives you something to revisit when you're making your final decision. That said, there's a balance. Taking too many notes can be really distracting for both you and the candidate. It can make the conversation feel stiff or disconnected, but from a legal and documentation standpoint, solid notes are essential, especially if you ever need to defend a hiring decision. To keep the interview flowing smoothly, it's a good idea to tell the candidate up front that you'll be taking notes and that there may be pauses here and there. Or if you are in the middle of taking notes, just let them know, hey, hold on a second, I'm just taking a few notes. This helps set expectations and reduces any awkwardness. At the beginning of your note or interview form, make sure to write down the basics. So their name, the role that they're being considered for, the date, names of all the interviewers involved, your name, title, so on and so forth. From there, focus on capturing the candidate's responses, especially any key points that relate directly to the competencies you're evaluating. You don't have to write every word, so just use shorthand or jot down phrases that capture the essence of what was said. So here are a few tips for effective note taking. First, try using shorthand or key phrases rather than writing out full sentences. You want to capture the important points without losing your place in the conversation. That leads to the next tip: stay engaged. Don't let note taking pull you out of the moment. You want to be actively listening, not just transcribing. And then make sure you're taking notes objectively. That means writing down what the candidate says, not what you think about what they're saying. So, no judging or interpreting while you're still in the interview. And an important reminder: Don't assign scores or ratings while the candidate is still in the room. It might be tempting to jot something down while it's fresh, but scoring is best done after the conversation ends when you have time to reflect and compare fairly. Finally, your notes should be clear and support the ratings that you end up giving. If you rate someone a 4 or a 2 on a competency, your notes should explain why, based on what they said. As you get to the end of the interview, it's important to close it thoughtfully. Don't just keep asking questions and then end the interview. Give them a clear sign that the formal part of the interview is wrapping up. Start by saying something simple like, "That's all the questions I have for now. Thanks so much for sharing all of that with me." This cues the candidate that they're shifting from interviewee mode into more of a conversation. Then open the door for their questions. Invite them to ask anything that they're curious about, whether it's the role, the team dynamics, scheduling, benefits, or what it's really like to work at your practice. These few minutes give candidates a chance to clarify what they need to know and gives you a glimpse into what matters to them. Be prepared to answer honestly, and if it helps, you can always have a company brochure or a benefits handout ready to share. It can be a nice takeaway that helps reinforce your professionalism and transparency. From there, you'll want to touch on a few final details to make sure both sides have what they need. You can ask if they're still interested in the position now that they've learned more about it. It's a good way to gauge alignment and enthusiasm. Confirm their availability. So, you might have this information already, but it's a good idea to clarify and see if there's any changes or preferences. And then if you haven't already, you can collect references. Um, then make sure to explain the next steps clearly. Let them know when they'll hear back from you and what the decision-making timeline looks like. It helps candidates feel informed and reduces any post-interview anxiety. Also, share how they can reach out with follow-up questions. Whether it's directly to you or someone else on your team, let them know who to contact if they think of something after they leave. And then finally, walk them out, thank them sincerely. This is one of those small gestures that leaves a big impression. You want every candidate to walk away thinking, that felt like a great place to work, even if they don't end up getting the job. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about evaluating them, it's about showing them who you are as a team and a workplace. So once all interviews are finished, whether you've interviewed 5 candidates or just one, it's important to take time for a debrief meeting with everyone who participated in the interview process. This isn't just a formality. A debrief is your chance to compare notes, to share impressions, and most importantly, evaluate the candidate's responses in a consistent and fair way. The ultimate goal here is to make sure that your hiring decision is based on facts and not feelings. You're aiming to choose the candidate who's the best fit for the role and for your practice while making sure that the process is objective, repeatable, and defensible. Now, ideally, the hiring manager is going to be the one leading the debrief. They can help guide the discussion, keep things on track, and make sure it stays focused on behavioral evidence, not just someone who I liked or that I clicked with. So here's a simple structure that you can follow to keep things fair and consistent. First, start with initial impressions. Go around the group and have each person share their gut reaction, thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. This is just a quick snapshot of how each person felt coming out of the interview. It could be helpful to record this, but remember, it's not the final decision. Next, move into a review of responses. Each interviewer should walk through the questions they asked, what the candidate said in response, and how well those answers matched up with the competencies or qualities that you're looking for. This step helps you focus on actual content and performance, not just personality. Then hold a final vote. After everyone has heard each other's observations, go around again and ask for an updated vote based on that full conversation. If there's a disagreement, that's Okay, it just means you need a little more discussion to unpack those differences. And then once everyone has had a chance to reevaluate, you can take another vote if needed. Now, the hiring manager is going to be the one that takes that final round of feedback into account before making a final decision. Here's the key. Repeat this exact process for every candidate you interview. That's how you maintain fairness and consistency. Again, it's going to help reduce bias. It's going to keep your hiring process legally sound and improves your chances of making a truly great hire. After all the interviews are done and every candidate has been evaluated, it's time for the hiring manager to make the final decision. This is where everything comes together: ratings, notes, impressions, and overall fit. When reviewing the information, the hiring manager should go over each candidate's scores and evaluations, double check that the notes support the ratings given, make sure that those ratings are tied to actual behavioral examples and not just general impressions, and consider whether the candidate fits both the role and the practice's culture. Once a decision is made, the hiring manager is also responsible for keeping all the key documentation. So that includes the job analysis details, job description, interview questions, rating scale, notes taken during the interview, and then the final evaluation forms for each candidate. Keeping everything organized ensures that you've got a transparent, defensible hiring process and that you can clearly explain how the final decision was made if needed. Whew. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. The behavioral interview process doesn't just help you make smarter hiring decisions, it helps you build a stronger, more aligned team by going beyond the resume and focusing on how candidates actually behave in real world situations. You're going to be setting your practice up for long-term success. Thanks for being a part of this session, and I hope you're leaving with some tools that you can use right away. Before we wrap up completely, I want to mention that we have behavioral interview guides available for different roles. We have tech, associate vets, CSRs, and kennel team members. So if you would like a copy, just send us a quick email and let us know which ones you're interested in, and we're happy to share. Yep, the email's on the slide there. And if you're curious about how iVet360's HR and team support service can help you streamline hiring or handling tough HR situations or support your leadership team, we would love to chat. You can reach us at any time at hrhelp@ivet360.com. So thanks again for spending time with me today. Happy hiring. So that wraps up the formal part of our session. I'd love to open it up for questions, whether you want to dive deeper into something we've covered or you're curious about how behavioral interviews could work in your practice. I'm here for it. So feel free to type your questions in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself and feel free to just shout out your question. Do we have any questions? Has anything come in the chat?
So we haven't had a lot of activity in the chat, but just to get things rolling, I do have a couple of just common questions that we get asked by hospitals all the time. So we can start with this first one, and that is, how do you get candidates to open up during behavioral interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of covered that a little bit, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. I think sometimes candidates are nervous or they're really just not used to this interview style. So I think that the best thing that you can do is to set a calm, conversational tone from the beginning. I like to let them know up front that I'm going to be asking about real experiences. And I also just let them know, hey, there's no perfect answers. Um, if someone gives you a surface level response, that's going to be your cue to use more probing questions. Like, honestly, kind of make it seem like they're just talking to a friend. You could say, hey, so what happened next? Or can you walk me through that part again? And then over time, as you're going through the questions that you have, and as they're getting a sense of the type of questions that you're asking, they should loosen up and you'll get more authentic answers. But again, I like to preemptively just let them know, saying things like, I'm going to be asking a mix of behavioral and standard interview questions. Have you encountered behavioral interview questions before? No? Okay, this is what that is. This isn't a secret, right? We're not trying to keep the style of questions that we're asking or the type of responses that we want a secret. You can let them know about the STAR method. You could say, if you could tell me the situation, uh, what you were supposed to do, what was the task, what did you do, and then how did it end up? All of that should help them open up. Good question.
Perfect. And then the next question that I have is, let's say that I really like someone during the interview, but their answers don't match the role, or vice versa. What do you do there?
Yeah, that comes up a lot. And it's totally normal to connect with someone during the interview. But that's the thing. Behavioral interviews are designed to help us move beyond personal impressions and to focus on the actual job fit. So, if the questions, or I'm sorry, if the answers don't show a competency in a key area for that role, like prioritization for a tech or, customer focus for a CSR, then that's something to pay close attention to, right? The structured process helps us ensure that we're hiring for skills and behaviors and not just personality. And I think that that's where, if you've done interviewing in the past, it's easy to make that mistake, right? Like, wow, I got really good vibes from that person. I really meshed well with that person. But because of that, you have a bias already, and maybe you're not really paying attention to whether or not they truly have the competencies to be successful in that job role. And it could go both ways, like you were saying. So, good question. All right, it looks like we've just got a few minutes left. And there weren't any other questions that came up, it sounds like.
Oh, it looks like we just had, let me see, we just had something come through.
Okay,
Okay,
well,
so, oh, sorry.
that's okay.
We had someone say sometimes we are interviewing a rookie candidate. So when we are asking behavioral questions, sometimes they've never experienced the situation before. I've always said, tell me what you would do in this situation. Is there a better way to ask them questions or help set them up so they feel they can answer the question better?
Yeah, I've definitely had that happen as well. So I think that you could kind of give them an example. So if let's say you're going to ask a question about the competency of multitasking, you can let them know, hey, you know what, in a veterinary hospital, we are constantly jumping from task to task, and it's really important to be able to multitask well. Can you tell me about a time when yada yada? And maybe they can't think of a previous work situation. So maybe they're just got out of school. Maybe this is the first job that they're interviewing for. So maybe in that situation, you could say, hey, you know what? If you can't think of a work related experience, can you, if you reviewed their resume, like I recommended before they came in for the interview, maybe you're seeing something on there like, I see that you were in the Scouts. I see that you volunteered here. I see that you did this at school or were on this team. So you might be able to relate that competency back to something else that they did that maybe wasn't work related, but is still going to be able to give you an idea of how they approach situations like that. And sometimes, honestly, it's okay to skip a question. I mean, I don't love it. And when it gets down to the part where I'm rating that candidate, maybe that's just a question that, like, hey, they really couldn't give me an example, which really is telling me that they don't have that competency. And maybe if they don't have one competency out of the 15 that you're looking for, that might be okay. But it's okay to prompt them. It's okay to give them examples. It's okay to kind of nudge them a little bit to see if they have a situation that they can share. And then if they truly can't, it's okay to say, that's all right, let's move on. Cool. Well, we are at time, and I really want to make sure to share this next slide with everybody. We have our next IVET 360 webinar coming up in June. It's on June 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. This will be presented by Seb from our marketing team, and the topic is Think Bigger, How Small Incentives Lead to Long-Term Success. In this session, Seb's going to walk you through smart, data-backed marketing strategies that can drive long-term growth and client loyalty without compromising pricing or service value. So if you've ever wondered whether small incentives are really worth it or how to unlock more value from the clients that you already have, this is the webinar for you. So Seb's going to be covering client behavior trends, lifetime value strategies, and how simple shifts in your marketing approach can lead to major gains. So keep an eye on your inbox for that one. You won't want to miss it. Thank you everyone for attending today.